Good evening and welcome to What's Your Story? My guest tonight is Janet Carville. She is a living, breathing history book. We are very fortunate that she has agreed to share her vast knowledge and marvelous memories with us. If you are interested in or are a part of Avon, Connecticut's history, this is the show for you. This is part 2 of a 2-taping set. Welcome to the show again, Janet.
Thank you. It's fun to continue.
Absolutely. The first 30 minutes just flew by. Now, I understand that you have a connection with Avon Congregational Church out in Avon. Would you please elaborate on that and tell us what that's all about?
Well, when my ancestors came to settle Hartford with Thomas Hooker and ultimately came to Farmington soon thereafter, it didn't take too many years before the people that came to Avon to farm and had to go back to Farmington to go to church figured, let's get our own church in this area. And that happened to be around 1750, so it was quite a 100 years of trucking back to Farmington, but we had to apply to the state of Connecticut because the church and the state were so intertwined and ask for their own church. And I believe it was the East Avon Ecclesiastical Society or something similar to that. That was the first church where they could worship and get their own parson and meet in somebody's house, which they did.
Yes.
And by then, a lot of the folks coming to that church service were from the West Avon area. And as they were finally meeting in someone's home down off of what's now Reverend's, down and back there was someone that had a house with an open shed where the people could put their horses and wagons while they went to church. And back then you had 3 hours of church in the morning, you took a lunch break, and you had 3 hours more of church in the afternoon.
Was that always on Sunday?
I guess so, unless they did something during the week.
Yeah, I mean, the actual church is called a meeting house, right?
Well, they met in somebody's house then.
Okay, before they got the church.
Yeah, oh yes, this is before the church.
So Janet, just set the stage for us, if you will, please. Farmington and Avon obviously are separate places. So if you had people from Farmington working in Avon, it was quite a journey to get from Avon to Farmington.
Yes, it was.
See, we think of it today as you hop in the car and boom, 2 minutes you're there.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that way then, right?
Route 10 from Farmington Center up to 44 is a long stretch of road. If you've got animals or equipment that you're dragging with you,
yeah,
that was a long trek.
How long would it take, time-wise? Did you get a ballpark?
I wouldn't even dare guess. I have no idea.
So it was quite a trek, though.
Yes.
Yeah, and the point I want to get across to the viewing audience, they may be thinking in the moment, but it wasn't like that.
No.
What you're talking about a long time ago when there wasn't the car dealership sitting on the corner there.
That's right.
That's right. So okay, so and I got caught up in when you said your ancestors were with Thomas Hooker when he came here.
To settle Hartford.
To settle Hartford. What were they, the Woodfords?
Thomas Woodford, yes.
It was with Thomas Hooker.
Group.
And so he was part of are there plaques or something out somewhere with the Woodford's name on it?
I believe in the north end of Hartford. I don't know if it's the end of Main Street or Albany Avenue or somewhere up near the Horace Bushnell Church in that area.
Okay.
There is an obelisk that's got all the names of the original people that came down with Thomas Hooker, and Thomas Woodford is on that plaque.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Right. Goodness gracious. Okay, so Avon Congregational Church. So now you're meeting in somebody's home, and you get bigger, obviously. Now you need a building, but the people in Farmington don't want to have to come make the trek to Avon.
It was the people in West Avon that didn't want it. They wanted the church to be there, thinking that was the center of town. And my ancestors figured, we'll put it on Route 44, which is the main drag.
Okay.
And push came to shove, and lo and behold, the building where they were holding their services burned down. They called it the Lord's Barn, but nobody knows for sure how or why it burned. At any rate, it burned. And for the longest time, the West Avon people didn't talk to the Avon people. And they raised their own money and built their own church, and we raised our own money and built our own church. But in this day and age, things are a lot friendlier between the churches.
You know, there's a book that will be coming out by your church historian, Nora Howard.
And Jeannie Parker.
And she will be talking about the mysterious fire that burned down one church and how the church split and became West Avon Congregational Church and Avon Congregational Church. Actually, I've had the pleasure of going to both places, and they're really quite nice buildings. But, I keep trying to stay in the historiography of the moment, not thinking about cars and SUVs and all that stuff. You're talking about horse travel and wagons is what you're really talking about, trying to transport things. buildings. So right?
And when they built our sanctuary across from O'Neill's Garage, right there in the center of Avon, they had an open shed out back where you could put your horses and wagons at that time. And when the automobile age became of age, somehow my grandfather got that building and dragged it down to Nod Road, and that's the 4-car garage that was in the back of his house. That used to be the old place to park your horse when you went to church. And Christopher's that's his garage now, but that's the old horse barn, not really a barn, it was the place to park when the church was first built.
Okay, so I'm not trying to be exaggerating here, but did you go to church in a wagon?
No, well, I was modern day. We had cars.
Oh, so you went in a car.
Yes.
What, like a Model T, a Ford, or something like that? Do you know?
Well, my dad had a 41 Ford, the old rounded kind, looked like a large Beetle. It was black. Everybody had the same kind.
Okay, so
color black.
so you, by the time you started going to church, you had automobiles.
Well, they brought me to church. I was baptized there, and I just had growing pains growing up. When the church first started, because it was the meeting house in the center of town,
Yes.
they didn't have a town hall as such. And if they had a town meeting that wasn't necessarily religious, you met in the meeting house. This is where you discuss things.
That's where you did your business.
You
yes.
did, right. And so rather than have weekly offering envelopes for the church to support it, you paid X dollars for your family pew. And I don't know what the rate was, but every time you went to that building for whatever purpose, you sat in the family pew. And my sister and her husband still sit in the Woodford family pew today. I can remember being in that pew as a youngster, and the pews don't go all the way down to the floor. There's about 4 or 5 inches. There's a center support in the pew, but the rest you can reach under and get the shoelaces. The people sitting in the row back of you, and this was great fun to get down on under the pew. I used to be little back then.
Yes.
Pull the shoelaces, and then my grandfather would realize that something isn't quite right. He would grab whatever he could and put me back on the pew.
Yep.
And that didn't last too long. I'm right down under doing shoelaces. So after short time, I got thrown out of the family pew. I figured, okay, they put me in the crib room down with all the other misbehaving people. And my dad had made us a sandbox at our house. He'd gone out in the woods and got 4 trees, small trees, and made a square and filled it with sand. And we didn't mind if the cat used it for a litter box. We'd play in the sand box. Well, they had a sandbox at the church, which was a tabletop with 2x6s around it and sand in it. And you stood in front of the table and played in the sand, which did not compute to Janet. So Janet's in the sandbox. And the poor woman that had to be in charge of all the miscreants that were downstairs at that time, I could see her taking me out, putting me on the floor. She would turn to go tend to somebody else, right back in the sandbox. So this didn't work very well. So one Children's Sunday, and I guess every church that has Children's Sunday has a different way of doing it, but way back when I was little, all the classes would have a little passage to read or a song to sing or something different.
Yes.
And I had to sing a solo at 5 years old. And after we got all through, the junior choir director came down. She said, "Would you like to join the choir?" And I said, "Yeah." I get thrown out of the family pew. I get thrown out of the crib room. Let's try the choir and see what happens. So I've been in the choir ever since.
I just keep asking about the cultural thing now. The church, as you remember it, did you have a mixture of people, of cultures in the church, or was it primarily
Primarily the white Avon old farmers, the settlers, the early settlers, which I guess were mostly English.
Okay.
Back after the Second World War, when they were building Avon, a lot of people from Italy came over because they were good stonemasons, and a lot of brick buildings were built in Avon by them. And the Ensign Bickford Company in Simsbury had an Avon office, and there were a lot of people. My grandmother Reed worked there. Well, back probably had to be in the teens, early part of the 1900s.
Now, you remember some of the ministers when you were there?
The earliest one I remember was William Hamilton, who was in the 40s. My mother was clerk of the church, and they didn't have committee meetings like they do in modern times. When they had church business to discuss, they would all come around our dining room table, the minister and the treasurer and whoever else. I don't know what titles they had, but there'd be half a dozen people sitting around discussing church business. And Mom would put on a pot of coffee, and I always liked to cook, so I'd bake up some cookies or cake or pie or whatever I was doing and feed them. But I wasn't too involved in listening to see what they were talking about. But later on, I went to summer church camp.
Yes.
And one of the leaders there was Bill Hamilton.
Okay.
And I asked him if he remembered my mother, and he did.
Okay.
And that was back in the early 40s that I first remembered him.
So how long have you been a member of the Avon Congregational Church?
I joined in 1952, so that makes it, what, 67 years or something?
1952 is when you joined.
yeah.
And you've been a member, obviously, ever since.
Yeah.
And you got married there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My children were the 5th generation in the family to get married in that church.
Your children got married there, too?
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of history.
So it is a lot of history. So describe a service at the church. I've been in that church, and I know that there's a balcony that is above, and that the choir is up in the loft, if you will, the choir loft. I guess that's where that phrase comes from. And occasionally they'll come down, but they're up there. Do you have any idea why the choir sings from up there and not down?
Nearer to God.
Is that the idea?
Probably nearer to the organ, because the organ that's there now was put in 1966, and the one that we had before then was over near where the Carolinic bells are,
Okay, all
about
right.
1/3 of that balcony, and it was the keyboard and organ and pipes, the whole business only took up 1/3. It was a much smaller thing, and the choir sat on the Route 44 side of the balcony.
Okay.
And the choir director, who was also the organist, could lean over and direct what was going on. That's why we were up there.
Now, in any place I've ever been, the women ran the show. I mean, I'm just going to put it out on the table here. Particularly in places like church. The women did the stuff behind the scenes and got it going. Was that true in your day as well?
Oh, yes. We had quite a women's group that worked there. We'd put on the church suppers, and they'd take care of the communion elements. And usually the women were more Sunday school teachers, and there were men. We had some men that helped out. But the nursery room for the little babies, the women, we did a lot of good work there.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes.
And you still
We
do.
still are.
And you still do.
Yes.
Now, there's a cemetery connected to that church, or next to the
It's
church.
right next to it.
Is that the church's property, or do you know?
No, it's a complete separate entity. Most of the people that are buried there are people that went to our church.
That's what I was wondering.
But it's not strictly that church only cemetery. There are other people that are buried there. There's another cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery, up on one of the side roads, that is all denominations of anybody that wants to buy a plot can be in that cemetery. It's not Catholic or Jewish or Protestant or,
It's non-denominational.
anything you want.
Okay, yeah.
And go there.
Yeah, so the audience may find this fascinating. You paid for your pew back then. Was it an annual thing you paid?
I believe it was, but that was before my time.
Yeah, but you paid for your pew, and that's where you sat.
Every time you went to church, you sat in that pew.
So now that may explain why the older people, if you will, still sit in the same place, you know, because there's been a legacy, a history of that.
Yes.
See, I never knew that. I never, until you told me, people paid for their pews. So you may have the Reed family's pew there, and when you went into the church, you never sat in anybody else's
No,
pew.
you'd be asked out.
Oh, really?
I believe so. You got your own pew. Don't sit in my pew. You sit in your pew.
My goodness, yeah. So that's changed now, obviously.
Yes, I understood that way back in the beginning when there wasn't much heat in the church, you could bring your dog to church to sit on your feet, keep your feet warm. And many of the churches that had the closed door, you had to open up a little door to get into the pew.
Yes.
That the reason was to keep any heat that was there in. That was the purpose of the door. And I don't know if our church originally had little doors on the pews or not. Probably Nora could tell you.
Yes, you know, we actually should give Nora a plug and talk about her book because she's done a fabulous job. She's the church historian.
She's the church historian and she's the town historian.
And she's the
Nora Howard.
Yeah, she's a town historian, yeah. So, you're about to celebrate your 200th anniversary?
They have a book coming out this summer that both the Avon and West Avon churches combined, and Jeannie Parker from West Avon and Nora Howard from our church. And I think there was someone else that was helping with it. But they interviewed a lot of people and researched a lot of records and got a lot of pictures and took a lot of current pictures.
Did they interview you?
They talked to me a long way, yeah.
Yeah. Is your picture going to be in a book? Do you know?
Probably.
Yeah. So, I mean, a person with your knowledge and background My goodness.
I've just been hanging around for a long time. It's nothing special.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have a whole vast amount of knowledge about things, and
I've lived through most of the history.
Yeah, that's right. The tradition of history is passed on like that. And I was really grateful, because when I first went to that church, people told me, and I told them about my show, they told me, you want to talk to Janet, because Janet's the one that's got the memory of everything that's happened here and why this book is over there and this is over there. So you remember one minister. Do you remember?
I remember them all.
You remember them all?
In my lifetime, yes.
Talk to me about the husband-wife team that was there.
Dr. and Mrs. Johansson, E. Jerome Johansson and Laura Lane Johansson were the ministers in the 40s, and in the 50s, they took over after Dr. Watson Woodruff retired. And in fact, they stayed 10, 12 years maybe, until they wanted to retire. You know, you can't blame them for wanting to put their feet up once in a while.
Yep.
And then I believe they got John Bankowski, who was young and energetic and revitalized the parishioners. The Johansons were, we knew what to expect.
They were predictable.
Very predictable. And here was this ball of fire that just lit up the world, and wow, we went to 2 services there for a while because we had so many people, we couldn't fit them all in the church. And they had 2 choirs. The youth choir at that time had a wonderful director, and they might have had 15 or 20 young women in the youth choir. 4 or 5 of them went to the Hart School of Music. They were that good. They put the senior choir to shame every time they sang. And there was one story, Del Tomkiel, who has since passed, but she was a wonderful director of that choir. And when the train still went through town, they would go through right about the middle of the service, and when the train was going by, the chandelier would be shaking, and you couldn't hear anything. If you're in the middle of a prayer, forget it, because you couldn't hear anything.
Yes.
Well, the youth choir had a special song they were going to do that one particular Sunday, and son of a gun, this choir director, little tiny woman, very short, she must have called God directly, but the train stopped way up beyond Towpath School, and you could hear it sitting there idling and idling and idling till the service was over, so that they could sing their song without having to be interrupted by the train. And then the train came through town after the service was over. She stopped the train.
She stopped the train.
I'd called somebody in New Haven or New York or Hartford, or it was the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad, and I don't know how she did it, but that train stopped.
So do you remember who the first female pastor of the church was on her own?
Well, Mrs. Johansson was the first.
No, but she was with her husband,
yes,
right?
Yes, they were both ordained ministers.
But I mean, who was the first female pastor on her own?
On her own.
If you don't remember, that's okay.
We've had some interns that were they're short-term. The full-time one was Martha Chenault that was recently was a full-time minister. We had other part-time ministers that were female, but they were only filling in for a short-term. A lot of nice people.
So your church has really evolved over the years, hasn't it? I understand you have a new bell now, right? Is a new bell up there?
Carillon.
A carillon, new carillon that rings.
The bell is the old one that was there.
Is the bell still there, or is the bell gone now?
No, the bell is up in the steeple.
Okay.
But they cracked it after the Civil War was over. Everybody was ringing church bells all over the country.
That's where I was going with it.
A lot of them, I think even the one down in Philadelphia got cracked maybe at that time. I'm not positive on that one.
At the end of the Civil War?
But ours did. Ours got cracked, and then it didn't play for the longest time. Finally, they took it down, got a crane, and they took it back to New York, and I think they had to have it recast. But Nora's got the story because my dad and my uncle worked on refurbishing the ropes that held to do it. They didn't work on the metal work of the bell, but they were doing some of the fittings and the ends that had to be tweaked.
Did your family members actually work on building the Avon Congregational Church?
My Woodford and a Bishop ancestor helped put it together.
Helped put it together.
Yeah.
And are there plaques or something, or any documentation?
Oh, there's plenty of documentation. Nora can have.
Nora probably
got all kinds of records that they've saved since the year 1 when everything got started. There are a few plaques in the back of the church that say where the land came from and where the organ came from, the carillons. But heck, you could put, and I think they have like a little trophy case in the back wall. They have the first communion flagon that was used. But.
Now, if people who have been listening to this interview and people who, like I said, who are a part of Avon's history, they know now why people go to you, because you're just full of so much interesting stories and life, as it were, dating back decades about Avon. Now, as I've talked to you, like I did when I first interviewed you, I came up with the idea that the farm and the church played pivotal roles in your life. Is that fair to say?
That's true.
So one no more important than the other, I would suspect.
Well, I don't know. Back then, we didn't have a movie theater, we didn't have a bowling alley, we didn't have a mall, we didn't have television sets, so you made your own amusement at home. We had board games, and that farm, I just lived outside on the farm, you know. I swear, I put 10,000 miles a summer on my bicycle, just going round the farm, or we would have treasure hunts where we'd put a note on one of the tobacco sheds saying, you know, look at the dairy barn, go in the dairy barn, put a note saying, look on this tree, and end up with a pile of cookies that I'd made under some bush someplace. And we just made our own fun. We had a great time growing up.
So the people that you grew up with now, are many of those people still at Avon Congregation? I know
they're all cousins. They've either died or moved away.
Okay, but I know your siblings.
My sister lives next door.
Is still.
Yes.
And how long has she been a member of the church? It's about the same time.
Probably 5 years younger than I. You know, she's 5 years younger than I am.
Okay, so she.
When we got to be about 13 or 8th grade in that area, they had the confirmation class, and the young people would join the church.
Now, what do you like best about your church? What do you like?
I
best
like the music.
Okay.
I like the music.
Tell me about the music.
Well, I've been in the choir over 73 years, but I never moved churches. You know, I started there, and I never changed churches, so I'm still
You've been in the choir 73 years.
Yes, I wasn't old enough to join as a member, but I was singing in the choir.
That's an amazing. That number right there is mind-blowing, that you've been there singing 73 years.
Well, I laugh when people talk about how long the Woodfords have been in Avon, and I said, we get lost easily. We don't go anywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
That's my pet line. But
we don't go anywhere.
Yeah,
so your family is not going to go anywhere. You're going to stay in the Avon.
I'm there for the long haul.
You're there for the long haul.
They'll either carry me out of the choir loft feet first, or they'll probably carry me out of my house for feet first.
Now, there was a flood that happened out in the Avon.
Many floods.
Many flood. What was the worst one that you remember?
The worst one I remember was in August of 1955. And I'm on a little bit of a hill, and there's a house across the street from me that had 1.5 feet of water on their second floor.
It was August of 1955?
August 19th. Yeah, that was a real mess.
So your house is elevated up, so it didn't impact you too greatly?
My house wasn't built at that time.
Oh, I see.
A few years later it was built, but it would have come halfway up my driveway.
It would have come halfway up.
We had to evacuate from where I lived down the road. The Army came down the road in a little rowboat that would hold about 4 people. We had about 35 people from all the neighborhood in our lawn, because we were on the other side of the road. It was starting to go up the mountain, so it was a little bit higher than over there where everything got flooded. But we had a lot of anxious moments trying to get the dairy cows out of the barn, which was being flooded, to get them up in the hill, up and back, to keep them alive. And cows aren't the smartest creatures in the world, and they would come out and they wanted to swim around back to the barnyard where they'd always felt safe in the barnyard. Well, we had one fellow that we had a diesel tractor. We got a new diesel tractor where the exhaust went up.
Yep.
All the other tractors would have been underwater. You couldn't drive them underwater.
Okay.
Well, he was on the diesel tractor, and you'd have to lasso one cow by the neck, take her across the road, take the rope off, and my sisters and I, we'd have to shoo the cows up in the back field. That was our job, to shoo the cows up in the back field. So we didn't want to lose the herd. And they got them all out, and then I saw the ferocity of the water lift up this tractor and pick it up and set it over about 6 feet. And the woman across the street, whose husband was driving the tractor, she was pregnant at the time, and she was having a fit thinking, he doesn't swim, he doesn't swim. But somehow we all got out of it, and boy, what a mess. The stink in the neighborhood of all the garbage that was hanging from the treetops and the telephone wires, that was just an awful mess.
Yeah. Now, you said something to me that was very, very interesting. Well, you said many things tonight during this interview, but you said my parents didn't really complain to us much about how to be good and decent human beings. They just showed us through examples. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, they showed by example. Oh, I got spanked as a kid. Of course, now they'd probably be in jail if they tried to spank me. Daddy had a white old razor strap that was very convincing when things went wrong. Mother was not the disciplinarian as such. If something happened, she would say, you wait till your father gets home.
Okay.
And my dad, we didn't have automatic garage door openers then, and I would quite often see Dad coming home, and I would run out and open up his garage door so he didn't have to get out of the car to put it in. And as an adult now, I can see how he must have felt horrible, because many times he'd thank me for opening the garage doors, and he'd go out, and here I am holding the razor strap, because he's supposed to spank me for something that happened 3 hours ago.
Yeah, yeah.
So that didn't work too well. But the thing that really worked on shaping up Janet, Eleanor and I were only about a year apart, and we did everything together. Many people thought we were twins. We dress alike, and we were about the same height. But when she could go someplace and I couldn't because I was bad, then it really hit home. That it paid to behave yourself.
So mom knew where to get you where you lived.
She was subtle, yeah.
Yeah, she knew where to get you where you
Yes,
lived.
yeah.
So what would you say to our audience in closing about your life and your experiences on the farm and your family history and your association? What would you what closing thoughts would you leave with us?
I was delighted to be able to grow up on the farm. I'm fiercely proud of my family heritage and all they've contributed to the country, and I'm just glad that I was there at that time. And
Well,
I thank you for putting up with me.
Well, we're glad you were too. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for tonight's show. My thanks to my guest, Janet Carville. Everybody has a story. What's yours? Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, good night.